Good morning. It's been a long, long life. And
It's been a good life.
it started a long time ago. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and it's a beautiful city. It used to be the second largest city in Missouri. Now it's way bigger than St. Louis. So essentially, I grew up there in my childhood, didn't leave there until I was 22 years old, had already graduated from the University of Missouri. So essentially that was in 1940 to 41, and I got a job in St. Louis working for the utility company there. And December the 7th came around and the war started, and by March I was either drafted or going somewhere else. And so essentially I ended up going into the Merchant Marine because I love the ocean possibility so much. So it was really interesting to go to sea for 3 years, go around the world, visit many, many countries. I was thinking of Cape Town, South Africa, and the surprising fact that Mandela, I thought that seat of government must be there. But instead, when he passed away, all that memorial service was in Johannesburg, and I wondered why. And it's because a beautiful big stadium has been built there for the world soccer teams.
Right, yeah.
So essentially, a war took me all the way down past South Africa like that. One time on up to the Suez Canal, got to see a little bit of Egypt, Italy, and a number of times, about 4 times, came across from the United States and enjoyed England. So it was an interesting life, and as long as we had a heavy war in Germany, I had a job, and our ships were carrying all the supplies that were needed to handle the army. Like we were carrying tanks and munitions and ammunitions so that the war could be fought. It was interesting. After I came back, I started thinking what I'll do next. And my mom and sister were living in Iowa because she was a teacher of deaf children and was teaching the school there. And when that job was petering out because the kids were going on to high school, we decided to move back to the home that we had in Kansas City. We cleaned it all up and sold it, and my sister had an opportunity to take either a good job in Florida or a good job in San Diego. We chose San Diego because we'd been in California before and liked it. Moved to San Diego, and there I took a lot of courses to become a teacher. And it was during that time that I was looking at the Baptist church and saw all of the people standing in the aisles and waving their arms. And so I couldn't stand to that particular religion. And so I went over to the Presbyterian church, and they had a great evening service for young people that were all graduates of school, so that they were in their 20s. And it was there in that, as I went to one of these evening services, I looked across the room and happened to see Grace. And that was the first chance we bumped into each other. And it was surprising how our lives had been so different, but there they seemed to culminate in a very happy relationship.
He was there with another girl that night.
You left that one off.
But I was always there with my girlfriend Dion, who was another dietitian, and then we were all together. But she was sick the next Sunday, so that was when he came by himself. That's when we first met.
Well, tell us about your childhood.
I had the same thing, going to church in San Diego when I first went down. The Baptist church was a Southern Baptist, and they were up where they were in singing and happy and in the hall dancing, and I hadn't been accustomed to that. I hadn't been accustomed to going into church where you were quiet and you were thinking, and so I went to Presbyterian church, and that's where we met. So.
Why did you decide to go to church? Had you gone to church your whole life, or is
Oh,
it?
yes. And it's so interesting, I started thinking of the fact that I was raised in a church called the Christian Church. And I was just thinking of what is the difference in our religious beliefs? And I think of her father. And he was a minister, and the reason he switched from one religion to another is because he didn't like the way people were baptized in one church. So he swung to another religion because he allowed that baptism. So interesting.
Yeah, so, well, I was born in Los Angeles, and I had a really great family. My father was a minister, and he'd done a great deal of work on the West Coast and establishing new services, going into remote areas where they didn't have churches. He had a boat up on the Columbia River that he'd go up the river and stop where the men are cutting wood and have services. And he had a railroad car that he was set up as a chapel, and he'd go do. So that's the work he was doing on the West Coast, but then he decided to make a change, and the job was in New York. So we bundled up the family when I was 7 years old, and we all went to New York. And that's where, pretty much where my growing up years. In New York, he was working for what's called the Ministers and Missionaries Benefit Board, and his work was to get funds for this organization that helped ministers and ministers in their retirement. And it was very interesting, good work. And we first lived in New York for a short time, and then their friends were over in New Jersey, so we moved over to New Jersey when I was in 4th grade. And it was a real fun time growing up. So different from these days now.
It was interesting, she was telling me about the fact they lived in New Jersey, but her father went down to a little train that went across the river, and he worked in lower Manhattan. And she says even later when they went over there, she finds thousands and thousands of people who live in New Jersey that work in New York.
Yeah, we were really not far, like 10 miles from the George Washington Bridge, so he just rode a train to across the bridge and then was on Manhattan, and that's where his job was there. But when he got home, he was a different person. He just loved, he loved the family, he loved doing things. He had his gardens, he worked with us. He one of the things he made for us, he cut down 3 big trees, and between 2 of them he put a big swing and the other a parallel bar, and we kids just loved it. And we always lived in areas where it was woodsy or outdoorsy, so we all learned to love the outdoors. And he's always making things for us. He made stilts that we could walk on, and took old skates and boxes and made us little carts we could play in. And all the neighborhood kids were always over at our house. So anyway, it was a fun time. But my family did do that a lot. We had a lot of activities, family activities together, so that was fun. But then when I went to high school, we moved again to Tenafly, which was even closer to getting across the Hudson River and over to New York. And we had a real nice home there. And the high school had students coming from all the communities around, and so it was interesting. Well, my brothers and I, we were a musical family, and my brothers and I started playing in 7th grade. I had the violin and he had a trumpet, and then later my other brother got a clarinet and an oboe, and my mother piano. So we always had our music together, and that was fun. So we did that at home, and then we also did it at church, and then at school we had a 100-piece symphony orchestra where we played. It took first place in the state for 5 years, and that was a really good experience. And growing up was have that. We all love music.
What did you play in the school band? What instrument did you play?
What
instrument did you play?
I played the
You
violin.
did, okay.
Yeah, and Frank had the trumpet, and Ken had the oboe and the clarinet. And then a friend would come over with the trombone. My mother played the piano. My dad loved to sing. So that anyway, it was a great home where we grew up there, and with lots of friends and neighbors. And well,
When did you go to college?
What?
Tell us about going to college.
Oh yeah, well I graduated from high school in '39, and I went up to a small girls' school in upstate New York. It's Keuka Lake. It was called Keuka College. It's between Rochester and Syracuse, and that was a great experience for me because it was a small college where we knew everybody, and they had lots of activities that we enjoyed, and a beautiful lake where we swam in the summer and we ice skated in the winter. That's so important, learning how to work with others. I know that's what my family taught us a lot as we were growing up. I can't believe it now, but I never in my life heard a cross word between my father and my mother or between us. And that's really kind of unusual. I know there were disappointments. I found my father's diary one time after Christmas, and he said he was disappointed. And he didn't say why or what, but there's something we did or didn't do that upset him. But we did learn, if things upset them, to talk about it. When I was a little girl and my dad was off, sometimes he'd be away for a couple of months, and my mother'd have to get milk and bread down at the little corner store. She sent me down with some money one day, and when I came back I didn't have the right change. So she questioned me about it. I said, I bought some candy.
That was the difference. So she was short of money.
So she sat me down and she talked to me about it. How much she knew I really wanted that candy. But she wanted me to talk to her first about it before she spent that money. And that's the way she treated us a lot of the time. We'd sit down and talk about it. So I knew there were disappointments, but they weren't hard or cross with us at all. They just talked to us about it, and that helped us learn. And then, being a church family, we were in the church every Sunday, all day long. Sometimes that was kind of tiresome for us as kids, but we learned a lot by being there and doing there. And I keep thinking about one of the verses that be ye kind one to another. Something what's false, forgiving one another. These things still in my mind pop out. When I was a little girl and going home from Girl Scouts at night in the evening, I came through homes and big trees and stuff, and I'd kind of get scared. So then I'd remember a verse in the Bible about not fearing because God was there. Those little little things still pop in my mind once in a while, you know, things like that. But
You can see
these,
the religious orientation of the family. When I was a kid, roller skating, because there's 4 wheels on each skate. Kids were roller skating all afternoon after they got out of school. They stick on the roller skates, and they fasten right over your shoes. Bicycle the same way. Get on my bicycle, maybe ride a couple of miles. And it's all along streets, but you enjoy it.
yeah, speaking of roller skates, when we went back to New York, we had to leave all our toys here in California. So when we had ice on the pond, we wanted to skate, and we'd skate with our roller skates. We'd be sitting down when we're standing up. But the first Christmas, Santa brought us roller skates and a doll and an electric train.
And ice skates, you mean?
Yeah.
Ice skates. Were ice skates on
They
shoes?
brought me ice skates and those things that we'd had to leave in California.
I had ice skates that fastened on my shoes, like clamping them on, like roller. Have you ever seen the roller skates where you squeeze them and they clamp against your sole? Well, the cheap skates are that way, but the one critical thing about ice skating is the strength of your ankles. And of course, there's no strength of ankles when you fasten something on the bottom of your feet. So we floundered along pretty darn well. But I've been down 5 or 6 blocks and there's a nice creek. It was only about as wide as this room. But people were going up and down it, and there was a barrel over there. They dump wood in, so when you got cold you held your hands out. It's a lot of fun even living in a city, but just think how simplified that is compared to the fact that now a kid can think of a dozen different video games. I saw a little kid the other day. He looked like about 4 years old. And I looked over at him. He was looking on a screen, and essentially framed. And I don't nearly know what it was, but he essentially was looking at some game of some sort. And he was probably about 6 years old, and by himself sitting in a big chair. So there's something we never had. We'd have to go over and play marbles on the floor.
We had still back on the East Coast where we lived back there, and our house at Tenafly was on a hill. We often would slide down that hill on our way to school. One time, my brothers, we had a long driveway from the garage out to the street, and my brothers decided they were going to drive the car. This was before they were old enough to do that. But they backed it out one day, and it got over a snowbank that the plow had left, and that car slid all the way down the bottom of the hill. They had to leave it there until my dad got back then. He didn't like chains on his tires because he thought he wore the tires out. So I didn't really like to really ride with him in the winter when we'd slide and slip and turn around. So I often would walk to church rather than ride with him to church on Sundays. But it was fun. And then I slid on my way to school quite often and fall down that way.
Didn't you say sometime he was out of town and he put his car up on jacks so the tires wouldn't wear out?
He sometimes would be out for 2 or 3 months at a time, and my mother wasn't driving, and so he'd just jack the car up because he thought it would wear the tires out if he just stood in the ground in the garage all that time.
And you know, I've heard that that was the time of just pure rubber in tires, and I remember tires having a crack in them, which showed that they had gotten stiff, and the walls were very thin then. Now tires are very much more rugged.
Well, this was a 1928 Nash that that we drove from California to New York. And we had that car until 1941, I think they bought another new car. Because they were driving back to California. So,
In 1928, Ford was building Model Ts, and I read that at one time he had that price down to $300 for a car, and he said Ford put automobiles on the map. He also showed the techniques of modern production. So he had that inline production technique of moving cars along, and invented all of that. And that's why his prices were so low, and everyone was driving a Model T, and it was amazing what they could do with them. I actually had a friend that died many years ago, but he said he was born in 1903, and he said that always lived in California. And they wanted to go into Yellowstone, Yosemite, and he said when they had the Model T and wanted to go in there, and it was real rough, they could always find that it would drive much better backwards. He said they would ride that backwards up. He said there were so few cars.
I never had more than $1 at a time. And that was fine because I got really attached to that and my buggy. And my little girlfriend down the street, mine was kind of a straw buggy. Hers was a really fancy buggy. She liked mine, I liked hers, so we would trade them. And then she had a huge big doll house at her house. And I loved to go and play at her house and play with that doll house. We never had a doll house. When we were kids, we did build a puppet show one time and made the stage, and made the curtains, and made the performers out of clothespins that had little wooden clothespins that had heads on them. And we had shows. We had shows that we gave. That was fun.
It was unbelievable, but my mother had a job that paid $100 a month, and our family consisted of my mom and her mom and two kids. I have a sister. 4 of us lived on that $100 a month. But the one thing was that my grandmother, her husband, had bought a very nice home for them. So the home was intact, complete, and nothing but taxes to pay. So that's where the $100 made it more efficient. But I look at the cost. I remember one time my tuition for a semester at the University of Missouri was $32. And you know now, you're talking about tuitions of $3,000 in our public institutions. So it's unbelievable the differences. Grace said, the price of gasoline back there was 25 cents a gallon.
Well, that's what we were paying in San Diego before we came up here.
25 cents a gallon. And you know, the nicest thing about that is the fact that with prices that cheap, people were just traveling all the time, vacationing. Well, we were everywhere from Texas to Canada, and we never even thought about the gas bill as being anything as a problem in driving. The biggest problem was the sleeping, so we had to figure out tents or something else to get by. But she carried so many things that we could just live right out of the back end for food and things like that.
Yeah, meat was, like beef was 45 cents a pound.
Chuck roast, yeah.
Gasoline 29 cents a gallon.
We paid 35 cents for a pound of butter.
$25 a month for rent. Oh, it was a different world then. Well,
It was really
I don't
interesting.
think-
We had what they call Blue Sunday, and that meant because of the religious concerns, they closed everything down. You couldn't go down to a grocery store and buy anything in Kansas City. on Sunday. Blues, did you go through Blues Sunday?
Oh, everything was closed on Sunday.
Yeah.
We never shopped on Sunday. Never shopped. I don't think Grandpa's mentioned that his father left their home when you were 7, was it?
Yeah, 7 years
So
ago.
this home with his grandmother was a very wonderful place for them to grow up. And it was his mother that was a breadwinner. And this grandma was the one that cared for them at home in a lovely home.
My father's brother, who I liked very much, he lived a long way separate from him, but he says he really thought that his brother was nuts, stupid. For instance, he took all the money they ever had and sank it in an oil well in Arkansas and got nothing out of it, and came out of there in poverty. He sold all good properties in California, in Kansas City. He'd owned a hotel there, but it all went into nothing. In that he had this fond hope of a big oil well, and a few years later he told me that a big oil well came in about a mile from where he was at. But you know, you put a hole in the ground, one hole is good and one hole isn't. Yeah, I think now they've pretty well found out that there's oil down below. You know, it looks like there's probably something to this if you can forget about all the crazy religion he tries to throw at us. And that's exactly, he tried to tie religion to using your hands as a chiropractor and got away with it for 15 years.
Yeah. That camp where they met is now known as Rogers Camp. It's still known that way. And a few years back, quite a few years back, Bruce wanted to go and see where his grandpa had a camp up there. So he did. He hiked up there and he sat down. There's a picnic table and it was set up as a campground. He said, I think I want to say a prayer to my grandpa. And he said when he did, all the leaves and everything just started going round and round and round him and up into the sky. He said, I think I made contact with my grandpa.
Isn't that something? When you can get in a setting that gives you that feeling.
Yeah.
And that's why those people would come up weekends from their works and the relaxation of being there and being together and encourage them to go on. I was at some of the clinics of those doctors that were making $1,000 a week very readily, and that was a time when $1,000 was really big money. But they were wealthy and had cars waiting in line with people to go in and being taken care of by them.
We wanted the children to know their grandpa, so he lived on the highway between LA and Sacramento, so we'd always stop. And it was a very interesting meeting every time we went there. Well, I was pregnant one of the time with Susie. And he looked at me and he said, you're going to have a girl and she's going to be an angel. And that's what I had, a little girl and an angel. But he was always courteous to me, always kind, but I didn't understand him. And he thought my father as a minister was a quack. But I figured that was his thought. I knew what my father was. So that didn't bother me too much. But it was he's an interesting person, really. But he didn't take care of his family when they were growing up.
Never gave us any money for educations or anything else. Or maybe drop by every year or so and stay an hour and give me $2 so I could buy a BB gun or something like that.
I think Grandpa, having lived through that, was really wanting to make his position as a father very important in the family,
Yeah.
and I think he worked real hard.
I actually wrote
for
him
our
that once.
children.
I said, I found, I really feel that I missed a father, and I want to be a better father myself.
So,
Boy, that really shocked him.
yeah.
He he never realized, but a father with children, and particularly boys, can be a great benefit to them. Playing together, working together, and essentially liking that. He didn't know the difference, but I had seen it and showed him that, and it separated our relationship so that he never came to Sacramento to visit us. But he visited my sister, who lives in, she lived outside of Los Angeles. But again, you have this fact of relationships in your life, and obviously there's a relationship that affected mine. And as a result of it, I felt I had a part of loneliness because I never had a male in my family to get that support. See, I had the simple fact of having a very nice grandmother and mother, and my grandmother acted as my mother. We'd read books together at night, and it was a very enjoyable experience, but never a physical experience. I was on my own to ride a bicycle, and my sister and I didn't do anything athletic together. And you know, in a big city where there's one house after another, there are just so many differences. The only thing I do remember was the fact that we both had sleds, and when there was enough snow on the hill, we'd slide down that hill so often until when we came home, we'd put our hands over the registers where the heat came up, and there was pain in our hands. Those hands unfroze practically from hanging on to that sled so long. Quite interesting, but you can see that there's a total different function there. Just think of the few things that a boy and a girl do in playing together very much. Jacks was a big thing for kids then. Hopscotch, but those are both girls' activities. I never played jacks. Did you ever play jacks?
Oh, yes, all the time.
Little, my mom would show us how to play.
Yeah. So you throw this little ball up and grab
Yeah.
a cute little thing that, and what I'm showing is the fact that it was a girl's game, and hopscotch was a girl's game. Did you ever see hopscotch?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where you jump back and forth from one square to another, and almost always girls were playing that. So.
We all had our dolls and our buggies.
And at school, when we had recesses, the girls were one place and the boys another. The boys were typically be playing baseball or running in races like that. But the girls were on another side of the playground with totally different activities.
When we were living in San Diego, one of the hardest things I ever had to do was when he was 9 months old, Grandpa was going to school, and we hadn't, I had quit my job, but I needed some more work, so I had a chance to one summer take the work when he was about 9 months old. And I had to find a babysitter for him, but she would only take him unless she took him full time. And so I had to leave him with her, except on weekends. And we were living with your mother then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then we would have him home with us on the weekend. But I could go see him every day. But I was there at the time he was just starting to crawl and move around, and so I felt like I missed out a lot of the time. Yeah, that's okay. It worked out okay.
You said that my dad, when he was born, you were telling me this morning about going to the hospital and will you tell that story about?
Yeah, well, Grandpa was working, by then was teaching in Oceanside, which was 50 miles away. And I didn't feel that I wanted to be that far away from the hospital where I knew it was about time within a week or so that the baby would be there. So I stayed with his mother in San Diego. And just after he'd left one weekend, I realized I had to get to the hospital. And his mother said, "There's no hurry, we'll get there on time, we'll be there all right." But I wanted to go, so she called a taxi. And we went in the taxi, and then he bumped the taxi driver. "Are you okay, lady? Are you all right?" We made it okay. Well, that day that, it was a Tuesday that your dad was born, and that was an election day. Grandpa was teaching. We didn't have a telephone, so I couldn't reach him until that morning. And so he made his way down to San Diego, but on the way, he had to stop and vote because it was election day.
Who'd you vote for, Grandpa?
It was 1948,
Yeah.
and the President of the United States lived in Independence, which is right next to Kansas City, Harry Truman.
Yeah,
And so I voted for Harry Truman while she was giving birth to
another thing about that Harry Truman business, after Bobby was born, what was it? I've forgotten what his name. Oh, the man that delivered the papers to the hospital where I was with the baby had worked and was working in the hospital where I had worked. So he knew me and he knew I'd had the baby there. So he went back to the hospital where I'd worked and told our dietitian, the head dietitian, that we named the baby Harry Truman. She was a staunch Republican, and she just had a fit because she would think that I would name that baby Harry Truman. But we
You know, the
did marry
interesting
Harry
thing is that
Truman.
when Bob was in this program of being taken care of by a babysitter, one time he was only about 3 years old, and he said to Grace, "She hit me, Mama." And right away when she heard that, Grace took him away from that woman right there.
Oh, yeah.
But he was smart enough
Yeah.
to tell Mom,
But
and when he said it that way, it showed the knowledge he had of that's wrong, and so I'm telling Mom about it.
oh yeah, I could hardly. I was taking, this is after Bruce was born, I was taking Bruce to the doctor, and Bobby was just not going to go into that babysitter's house. I said, "What's the matter?" "She hits me for things I don't do."
Oh boy.
So I just took him with me that day, and we found someone else later. But as me, a child that age, they understood, you know. So
You said this morning that my dad was lucky to have survived his birth. That it was a real difficult birth.
His birth was called a breech, wasn't it?
his,
We're talking about the birth of Bob.
yeah,
And wasn't it called a breech birth?
yeah, it was breech.
And very difficult.
And and then he was a 10-pound, 4-ounce baby.
So it's,
Oh, Nana,
And breech.
you're a saint.
And so it was difficult.
Yeah.
It was difficult, but the doctor delivered him, and he had no problems. Later,
it's interesting that Julie was telling me, she said, when I was going to have the baby, the doctor told me, you have big babies. And essentially you just look at the fact that some children are much more mature when they're born than others that are
well,
sometimes even a month early.
these days they would never allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Oh,
They-
that's
they
good.
would have known
They had no
before.
Caesar sections at the time.
They would have known before, and it wouldn't have happened. But anyway, he came through it very well, and he was a good little guy.
Yeah.
So we were in San Diego, And Bruce was born in San Diego. And then Bruce was 4 months old and Bobby was not quite 3. We moved to Sacramento. And Grandpa came on ahead because his job started in, September? Or 1st of
Yeah.
October?
I think it's the 1st of October.
And then I
And she was
stayed
in San Diego still.
I
And there was
stayed-
a train that she could actually come up on from San Diego.
I
He
stayed
came up-
down and packed things up and got them moved to the furniture. And then I brought the 2 boys up on the train. And it was the end of October, late October. And
She
then
said
then our
Bruce was real small and lying on the bench where she was. And she looked away a while and looked back and he was gone. And she was shocked,
It's under my
except for the fact that he slipped over the edge and he was down on the floor.
Yeah, that was something you know. And then Grandpa took us to a Chinese restaurant that night after we arrived
Oh,
in Sacramento.
yeah. That was a lot of fun.
He had rented a house for us in North Sacramento. But the furniture van was lost our furniture. So it was 10 days before we could have any furniture. And here I was with a new baby and I was worried about sterilizing his bottles and all. And you had brought a Coleman stove and you brought the television, and you brought the ice chest. And that's about all we had. But the garage was attached, so the 2 boys slept in the garage of the car, and a friend gave them a mattress, and we slept on the floor until that furniture was found down in Oakland.
Oh, goodness. What?
We had neighbor though, they were so kind to us, and they just wanted to help us if I wanted to fall, and they had a little girl about Bobby's age, and he played with her. And it worked out okay, and Bruce lived through it. So many things have developed since we were young, and I'm even thinking of the television. Our first television was the one that Grandpa built himself.
Out of
You
the
built
kit.
a
Out of
television?
the kit. Oh yeah, that was just when they were getting started. We had black and white for years.
Yeah,
And-
before that, we would take Bobby in the little stroller up to the furniture store where they had a TV in the window and watch
So
programs.
we looked at a program there.
So then he built us the first television. We had that for years. I guess we gave it up when we moved over on American River Drive.
And
What was that car you had when we were married?
it was a Chevrolet coupe. A Chevrolet.
Chevrolet?
Yeah, and it was built before the war, and when I bought the thing after the war, it was in pretty rugged condition because they built no cars during the war, and after the war was over, it took them a year to get it started again and make enough cars for the people to buy again.
We were driving from Pasadena over to the coast, and the accelerator wouldn't work.
That's on the honeymoon.
So he had a throttle on the car. So he had to control the speed of the car by pulling his throttle out back and forth like that. Before he sold that car, the doors were almost falling out, but then he bought us a
Plymouth.
Plymouth in
Yeah.
1949.
$2,000 for a brand new car.
Yeah.
It's a good deal now.
Yeah, now it
Back then, it was a lot of money, I imagine.
must have been, yeah.
We had that Plymouth for years, and it was parked in front of the house in South Sacramento over there, and some woman who had been drinking, didn't know what she was doing. She backed the car all the way down for several blocks, and he ran into our car. It was parked in front of the house. So Dad was just going to get rid of that, but a neighbor across the fence wanted it.
And he bought
And
it from me for $50.
he's going to get it fixed. But anytime anything went wrong with the car, he'd have to come and tell us about that car of ours. It wasn't no good car.
You were telling us how bad it was. And I'd say, well, what do you expect for $50?
We took lots of trips in that Plymouth.
Yeah.
Lots of trips in that Plymouth.
The most fun I think that we ever had in traveling was the fact that we had a camper on a pickup. And so we'd climb in that camper and Grace could make meals in it very nicely. We could sleep in it nicely. It was just a lot of fun.
But when the children were younger, we drove more miles in that Volkswagen bus we had. But we went to Canada, we went to Mexico, we went down to Grand Canyon one year, and it was so cold we couldn't go and stay overnight there, so we drove on down into New Mexico to those caves down here. I've forgotten what they're called now. But we took lots of trips in that Volkswagen bus.
And it's really interesting. My sister had a brother, he was younger than she, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And
2 years.
she didn't get along very well with her husband, with her parents. And one summer, when she was a junior in high school, she went with that camper up to us in Canada. And you know, the interesting thing was the fact that you could sleep on the bed up above has a big window in front of it, and the girls would sit there and go like this, and when the big trucks were coming along, they had a way by which they could honk their horns. And when the girls go like this, the men driving the trucks would honk at them.
This
And
is Ann that lives in Maui.
Yeah, cousin Ann.
You
And
met
at that
Ann.
time,
Yeah.
she was a junior in high school, and she told my sister, when I graduate from high school, I'm getting out of there.
That was one of the most frightening
He
things
was
I
in
think
the
ever
back of the
happened
truck.
to us.
He and the boy's father. The father was driving, and the son was with Bob. They went over a huge bump and dropped him right on the cement. And interestingly enough, finally, we were at Tahoe, and someone said, someone's given your name to call the sheriff's department, and we did. And he said, your son's in the hospital.
How old was he?
We came down and he had a severe head injury, and they were trying to reach us to do surgery.
Wasn't he about 15?
Yeah, about 15.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 doctors at the hospital had to go ahead and make a decision that had to be done. So
And a
they did
concussion.
it before we got down, and he was unconscious for 3 days.
What
And the first thing he wanted when he woke up was a chocolate milkshake.
He still wants those.
So there was a Carnation Company across the street, so we got him a chocolate milkshake. But it's amazing that he recovered so well from that, with no permanent injuries really, because it was quite a severe head injury. And then his friend Lauren had a broken leg, so he was in the cast for a
That's
long
right.
time.
Lauren with him.
And their dad, Lauren's dad, felt so badly about this. He said he knew the boys were in the back of the truck, and he knew they were standing up there, but they seemed to be okay. But he went over a bump that threw him over.
I remember when your father graduated from high school, and he had a choice of going to a little junior college nearby, but he also heard about the California Maritime Academy, and that's what he chose to do. And interestingly enough, Susie,
Ken.
Ken and he were both going down in there, and Ken's father had a business, and the boy earned enough money so he owned a nice car. And so he'd drive Bob back and forth every week, and quite often every weekend. And then they'd both have dates. They'd come by our house, and sometimes the boy would drop by to Bob up, and he had a date already, and they'd come in the house, and Susie was 3 or 4 years younger and just a kid, and the big kids went out on dates, and he never even looked at her. But the interesting thing is that when she came back after she graduated from the university down there, she graduated from Arizona State in nursing education, and came back and got a good job. Wasn't it Sutter first? Major hospital there, and so she wanted a figure on how she could have a house of her own, and so Grace and I bought it for her, and it was $42,500, and it was on a half-an-acre lot. And did you saw it? And when we bought it, it had a nice little 2-bedroom house on it, and so essentially she moved into that, and the area was rural enough so that for quite a while she owned a horse and had a little barn back there for the horse to go in. Every once in a while they telephone us and scream that the horse had gotten out and gone down the street, and we had to go over and get it and put it back in its barn. But essentially, when we bought that and she was moving into that house, Ken, of course, knew her very well from Bob. He was driving by on his bicycle, and so he looked at it and looked at the house. He said, "So you're moving in here? Well, it'll be pretty nice." And then he told her later on and said, "You paid way too much for that house, $42,500. And by the way, we just made the big payment on it, and she got a mortgage, and so she owned the house after that." And so the interesting thing is that when he moved into that house with her, they finally decided to build that larger house in the back and divide the house. The property is divided into 3 lots now. And he said, "Gee, you know, the county, when they divided it like that, made me pay taxes on 3 lots that are valued at $75,000. And there you are, without even the house being evaluated. He had that, and all of a sudden he realized that $42,500 didn't look so bad anyway.
Working with these children, each one is a being in itself, and they're all different. They have different interests, different talents, different abilities, and it is hard. But you work it out. You just kind of watch them and listen to them, and you kind of find out what their interests are, and you're doing really well with your children.
Do you ever remember why Susie decided she'd rather go into nursing than going into dietetics?
No.
But she went to Sacramento State for 2 years, and then she asked to get into the nursing program, and they said that they had such a vast number of girls that wanted to become nurses that it might be a year before she'd get into the program. And that's when with my background with all the colleges in the area, I telephoned all around. I called BYU because I thought it's a very popular school, and it's Mormon. I don't know if you know, but I called them and asked them about their nursing program, and it sounded very nice. And she said, "There's one problem to you. If you're not Mormon, you'll find that to graduate from this university requires you to take at least 2 courses in Mormonism." And when we heard that and had no interest in Mormonism, we backed out of that. And then I found that there were openings at Arizona State, and so that's what she decided on. Boy, we used to drive down there, and boy, it was a long drive to Arizona State, wasn't it? And we'd drive straight through and knew all the Taco Bells along the way, and that sort of thing.
When she was in school at Arizona here, I was working, Grandpa was working, and it was kind of hard for her to get back for school, so we bought a Toyota, and we let her use that. And then we let her take that down to Arizona with her, and both the boys felt that she was always the favorite one. Because
She was the only one that we bought a car
only one that
for.
had a car. But that was it. I don't think they.
When you think of Bob having to bum rides all the time with Ken, and see, we didn't buy him a car, so.
Well, in those days, there was just one family car.
Mm-hmm.
Others in the family didn't have cars. It was just one. But in those days, mothers weren't working. We don't get much training to be parents. We have to learn as we go. And each child is different. Each child has different needs. And I think it's so important to listen to them and try to understand them, let them know that you want to understand what they want, what they need. It's also important that they know, I think routine is real good for children. I found that anyway. And that they know the rules and they know the consequences.
And I don't know, I think careers develop. There aren't many people. Now, I've had a few friends whose fathers were lawyers, and they knew from the time they were a kid they were going through law school and move into daddy's law firm. That's real simple. But the rest of us are sort of drifting until we find something that'll take care of us.
I think with ours, I probably would give them a little more opportunity to talk about what they'd like to do. We so often would plan everything and pop them in the car and off we go. Let them make some decisions. They will learn by those. Some of them won't work out too well, and they'll learn by those.
We came up to Sacramento because I had a very good job offered to me, and I was in the department, and any teacher in the public schools had to get a teaching credential from our office in order to teach in those public schools. So we were evaluating their background and college programs in order to give them those credentials. And so I had my 15 or 20 years of employment there, and interestingly enough, Grace took care of our 3 kids until the youngest was 9 years old, and then all of a sudden she found this huge job at Kaiser, and Kaiser just had moved into the Sacramento area from San Francisco, and she happened to see the whole hospital bill because she was right there when it started. And for 15 years, she was chief dietitian, food service manager, and served 300 people 3 meals a day.
Well, that was interesting too, the way I got that job. I hadn't worked from the time Bobby was born until Susie was about 9 years old. And there's this little community hospital on the corner of Morrison Cottage. And a friend saw they needed a dietitian. And I went over and was interviewed, but I decided I wasn't ready to go yet. I didn't want to leave the kids yet. So I didn't take the job, but a year later they called, "Won't you reconsider? We need a dietitian." So I did, and I worked there for 9 months. Kaiser came and bought that little 45-bed hospital. And from there we grew from the 45 beds to the 300 beds. During the time I was there and the clinic was built, the hospital was built. There were only 13 doctors when Kaiser first came to Sacramento. So we knew everybody, and 6 of those doctors lived in the same neighborhood we did. So we got to know everybody well. But it was it was a really lucky break for me.
Yeah.
And,
What-
and Kaiser grew so
Walking.
large that they had 3 hospitals there. And it was interesting, about 4 years ago, Medicare came into California to evaluate all the public programs in the health field. And they walked away saying the only complete hospital system was Kaiser Permanente. And they gave them a 5 rating and then showed the weaknesses of all the other colleges as to why they didn't measure up to the full growth that Kaiser had.
Yeah, but that was such an interesting job. And I was the only department head that was kept when they came. And I think it's because I didn't have anyone in San Francisco that wanted to come up here to do the dietetic job. So I just walked into these jobs I had. I never had to really go look for one. But it turned out to be really good. They had a good program of education for us. All of us, we met frequently. I go into Berkeley to the offices where I met with all the dietitians in the Bay Area and around at that time. And so I really like my work there, and it's been such a good benefit now to us because all the rest of our lifetime we're covered well. The
Your friend
hospital
says-
was non-union in the small community hospital, so of course Kaiser came and it became unionized. So Kaiser had to pay the salaries that were paid in the Kaiser hospitals in the Bay Area, which are considerably higher than what they hear in Sacramento. But anytime they started raising the employees, they had to raise mine too. I was
So-
not
So she's getting San Francisco wages.
I was called exempt,
Yes.
so I was not union, but they had to raise mine too
At the
because
same time.
union salaries were coming up so fast. So that
So-
was a benefit to me in the
So
work.
that's how she decided that she could live in a nice home in an area where all the doctors lived. Right?
Yeah.
Well, you
They
know,
all knew
we were
she lived
living
there,
in
too.
We were living in the South Sacramento. It was an area of moderate priced homes, but lots of family homes, lots of children who coming in, and it was a good place for the children to grow up. But one of the junior high schools had been burned, and their students were transferred over to the junior high school where we lived. I could see elements coming in that I didn't like. Children with knuckles, brass knuckles, things like that.
It's
Just
down
the
in the
fighting area.
minority
And I just
neighborhoods.
didn't like that. So as long as I'd moved to my job in Kaiser, we just felt it was a good idea to come this side of the river and started looking. And we happened to drive through that neighborhood. It was very new, there weren't very many houses there. We liked that, we liked the school next door, and that's why we decided to make the move. And then Susie started
As a
high
freshman,
school, her
she went
freshman
to
high school.
4 years of high school right there next door.
And Bruce had 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's been a good home for us there.
Bob had already gone to California Maritime Academy, so he came back and forth for another year, and he was going to sea.
Yeah.
And Bruce had 2 years of junior college here in Sacramento, and then he moved down to Cal Poly for his last 2 years.
Our real success has been the fact that there's a gal that earned as much as I did. We put one of the salaries in the bank, and essentially, as a result of it, and we were telling you how we bought 4 houses at the same time, and believe it or not, we pay income tax on $14,000 worth of profits from those rentals. 3 rentals that one's $2,000 or $1,400 a month, one's $1,500 a month. And those checks roll in the first of the month. It practically, those 3 months is take care of her being right here, Barry Redling. We have
That did help, that Kaiser job of mine did help because we were able to to live on my salary and put his completely away.
Yeah.
And at that time, we were getting 25% interest on our investments, things like
Oh,
that.
it's ridiculous.
So that helps us now as we're older
Yeah.
to be comfortable and have what we have. And,
When we were building our cabin, there was a guy that I worked with, and he heard how we were building, and he said, "Did you ever wonder how you could really afford to do this?" And you see, the reason is the fact that we had a salary, an extra salary that could go into it.
We hadn't started the extra salary though until later, but we were able to manage it.
Hmm. When we built that cabin, it cost $3,000 in materials. And our labor was the thing that was all free.
We did live rather frugally. We lived comfortably, but we were really careful about what we spent and how we spent it, and we didn't spend a lot going out for dinners or movies and things like that. We made our own entertainment.
I did have an accident in the bus where a gal was turning and she bumped into my bus and it rolled it over and ruined it. And I went in the hospital about 3 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was more serious than you realized at the time.
Oh yeah. But on the other hand, it's surprising how some people come out so readily. I thought it was relatively simple.
Well,
You were there for 3
It
days,
was.
the hospital for
Yeah.
3 days? Was it scary, Nana?
He was thrown out of the bus, and he hit his head on as he went by, and he had a fracture all the way across this way. And it was really difficult.
What hospital was I in?
Kaiser,
Kaiser?
you're at Kaiser.
Perfect.
It's so long ago, I can hardly remember it.
Yeah.
And I was by myself, you see, so essentially, when you said car wreck, I started thinking, how many were in that car?
I didn't know it was a bus accident.
A little,
It was a Volkswagen bus.
little dinky Volkswagen bus. They're very popular.
Yeah.
We had this Volkswagen bus. We traveled over the whole country in that and up to Canada. And Grandpa fixed it up so it had a bed, and the two boys slept under the bed and Susie on the seat in the front. And we traveled over the whole country down to Mexico. We took the two boys down to Mexico when they were
And you know, the interesting thing is
8
that
and 6.
gasoline was like 30 cents a gallon, and it was so reasonable then. Here, they're finding that vacations are much shorter because people don't want to spend that much money on gas.
How?
This took a lot longer recovering than he remembers or that he experienced at the time, because he really wasn't into it for a while. But he managed to pull through.
You?
Yeah, I went back to work.
Yeah.
I was working then, just driving back. I guess I'd probably driving back and forth to work, wasn't I?
You were on your way to work, and
Yeah.
there's a woman making a turn in front of you, and she was taking her child over to the hospital for some reason or another, and you came along and you hit her. I don't know what
And she went in front of me apparently.
it is a
Made a-
case of
made a
his
turn.
making
Yeah.
a turn, and
I heard someone say she never saw me. And you know, I hear a lot of awful traffic, bicycle and motorcycle accidents where the person says, I never saw them. And you know, it's because we think of a car as being a certain size, and to have something that small, it changes the perspective. So that's where the injuries occur.
you had 2 trips in the ambulance that day. I bet you don't remember those.
No?
No.
Back and forth between Kaiser and Mercy Hospital for other reasons. Anyway, that's long ago. One of the fun trips we had with that bus was way back when Susie was 5 years old. We left her with Eileen Bard in San Diego, and we took the two boys and Nan and Myrtle, his mother, to Mexico City in that bus. It was such fun riding in that, and we'd sleep in it at night. I don't know how his mother did all this with us, but she was always so good going with us.
Or we stop in a motel or something like
Yeah.
that.
And when we stopped to get gas any place, we watched the children, because if you left your car open, their little hands would get inside like this. So I always carried
weren't
cookies
grabbing
with me.
anything.
I always carried cookies in my
Yeah.
pocket. So this one day, one little boy, I saw him there, and I walked over to the car, and I gave him a cookie. He put his fingers in his mouth and blew his whistle, and 10 more kids came running from the bushes all around. But you know, after he'd eaten his cookie, he reached in his pocket and brought out a whole handful of millet, the grain millet. He wanted me to have
And
that millet.
they eat it directly.
That
Just
really
chewed on it.
impressed me. And then we got to Mexico City, and we'd go to a park, and there'd be boys playing ball, and the Mexican boys would come over and ask our boys to play with them. They couldn't understand each other at all, but they had such a
Both
good
play
time.
baseball.
So again, his mom was such a help to us as we traveled that trip. That was fun.
Well, the simple fact was that I came into San Diego at the end of the war, and it seemed to be a relatively quiet town. And essentially, I saw an area in the town that was quite vacant, and I just went down to a tax sale in which the property was sold by the county to the highest bidder. And I bid $900 for 10 acres of land in the city. And believe it or not, it was just bare rolling hill, and there's no road on it at all. And it didn't have, there was not imagination to think about it. And so we just paid, I think we probably owned it 10 years of paying income, paying taxes on it. And all of a sudden, they put in a new freeway and wanted all of our property.
It was a freeway exchange, so they had to have that big piece of property. Make the exits and on-ramps.
So what year did you end up selling it? I guess in.
Oh, we went up one day.
We were living here when we sold it.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
we went up to Sandy, Cal Poly. Bruce was at Cal Poly. I think your dad was there then too. And we had this money that they'd given us for this property.
See, the federal government, when they want something like that,
Yeah.
they just go to the property taxation board, and they see everyone that owns the property and pays a tax on it. And there's an address, and they contacted me and said that our land was going to be utilized for freeway purposes. And we had heard, of course, you could fight it in the courts if you want to, but our thought was that it had no significant value to us, and the government needed, they could have it. And we bought, they gave us $85,000.
We do a lot of camp. That's what we were doing the weekend that we picked up the property at Tahoe, and we've been out camping. And we're just driving Highway 89 and saw the sign that there were lots available. There were only 3 lots available at the time, and we chose the one we have because someone had had it before and left it, but they had done some clearing, so there was space to build a cabin without our having to cut down a lot of trees. And there was a driveway in at the time.
There's 100 cabins there.
Yeah. How many were there when you first found the property?
They were just beginning to build.
Yeah.
So we were one of the first to get to build, weren't we?
Yeah. Down, yeah, there weren't very many that had built up there yet.
They just had a sign out on the road out there Forest Service lots. And then they told you where to go. So we went over and they gave us a map that showed all the lots that are available, and you walk around to each one and see what you like.
And picked that one out the same day.
We both loved the outside and outdoors, and took the 3 kids on picnics up in the mountains, and sooner or later happened to see that there was a lot in the public service, a Forest Service department where you could build your own cabin on it, and that's what we did. And our kids grew up in that cabin, and the cabin is still there, and now our grandchildren are still going to that.
And your great-grandchildren.
And interesting too is the fact that we have a granddaughter who's marrying next year, and she chose to be married in that mountain setting, and so they're at 6,200 feet. She'll be married in July at a beautiful little lake not far from Lake Tahoe, and her mom and dad live at Lake Tahoe in the summertime, so our cabin is 3 or 4 miles away from it, so all of us know the area very well.
Yeah, we sure had fun building that cabin. We were always building things together from the time we first knew each other. We were always making things. But the cabin, we took the piece of land, and there's no power, no electricity, no water, nothing up there. So he borrowed a diesel generator from his dad. That's what he used for his power saw. And then we had the stream by near where we had water, and we'd go over to Baldwin Beach to swim. And so then his mom came and helped me with the children while he and I worked on that cabin. And it was a real, I look back now, I don't know how we did it.
How long did it
One
take
nice
you?
thing about Lake Tahoe was that there we were worn out from working on that cabin, and we'd go down to swim and get our bath at the same time.
How long
My
did
big brother came up with his family to visit one time, and they wanted to take us out to dinner. And his wife looked at me. We'd been up there probably 2 weeks, and we were dirty and changing clothes for. And she said, "Grace, you're dirty."
You'd been working hard.
So I went next door to the next door cabin, and I borrowed some clean clothes. And we went out to dinner, and then when we got back, Loring looked at me. He says, "You know, it doesn't really matter what you wear up here." But it was such a wonderful place for children to grow up.
Yeah.
We had that bell that's still on the cabin, and they had to stay within the sound of that bell. And they came, and they did that. They did it well. We didn't have to worry about bears then and other things, so they could roam. And then when they got older, I gave them a time, and they were really good about coming. One time I asked little Harvey, our little dachshund, he'd come along first, and then the kids would come along after him. But they did a lot of exploring and roaming around, fishing. Bruce loved to fish. They stocked Taylor Creek once a week, and I'd take them down there, and they'd spend all day on the creek hitting fish.
Yeah.
So
So it was
they've all
working
looked
all
like-
week in Sacramento, and Friday night to Sunday night we were at Lake Tahoe and enjoying the outdoors.
How
Yeah.
long did it take to build that cabin?
About 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, the first year we got the foundation in, and then it's a log we got that went together like Lincoln logs. And we got it closed in, didn't we? We didn't get the tile on the roof yet, but the wood was covered. It was closed in that first year. And then the next year, Uncle Bard and Aunt Ida came up, and the 2 men put the tile on the roof
Yeah.
that next year.
And that same roof that we put on 50 years ago is still there
Yeah.
and doing very well, and nothing seemed to be happening that's going to change it in any way.
Yeah, there's a contractor building another one just down the street. So when we get stuck on something, we go down, he'd help us with it. And he cut the first rafter for us, so we had knew we were doing it right that way.
At the time, there wasn't a sewer system up there that took drainage to a central drainage situation at all. So you had a great big septic tank that was full of water, and all the debris from the house would go in a big septic tank in water, and just clog itself up until it flowed out into the soil. And so essentially, the interesting thing is we had to dig the big septic tank hole that was almost 6 feet deep and 4 feet long and 6 feet wide, long too. And so essentially one day I was mixing cement real hard up on the ground, and Grace was down in the hole taking the cement and putting it down in this form and laying it down. A man came over and saw her down there and said, "We don't think that women should be doing things like that."
About 10 days later, he came back and he said, "I remember you down in that hole."
Yeah, you're a pioneer, Nana.
Oh, it was fun. We had lots of good memories. We had a volleyball net between two trees, and that was one of the big activities up there. Everybody would play volleyball. It was a great place for young people to grow up, and still a fun place to go.
Wonderful place to
I'm
go.
glad we still have it. But once we started building the cabin, we kind of dropped out of going to church every Sunday. We'd leave every Friday night up to Tahoe, so we've kind of gotten out of the habit of going all the time, but it did mean a lot to me as I was growing up.
On the radio not long ago, I heard that there was a group that went around and talked with 1,500 people, and they asked this question: do you believe in God? And you know, the interesting thing is, I think of when I was raised as a kid, God sat on a throne, and when Jesus died, he had a chair right beside his Father on a throne. And you know, essentially, we've come to realize that even Jesus had no knowledge of where heaven was. It essentially was something that must have developed perhaps in the Jewish mind, and Jesus was a Jew. But essentially, it's hard to tie things together. But now you think, I think of a much broader situation now. Many people in the field of do you believe in God start thinking not as a person up there somewhere, but as a force in our lives which leads us to do good and live together well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you said, do you believe in God, what would you answer?
Well,
Where is he?
right, just right here. That's.
But never thought of him as out somewhere in heaven.
I did for a long time, you know, until just probably a few years ago. I
Mhm.
really started to get
You know,
this idea.
After we've been to school and college and church and all, in later years, you just wonder about these things. You just wonder about these things.
Well, you know what you're looking at is hundreds of generations, and just think of him living in a simple situation. Just think, I think I was telling you that Clint went through Nazareth, and I read that Jesus, until he was age 32, lived in Nazareth and as a carpenter. And after that, he developed just a philosophy of life. I never heard of his God going through school or through any kind of religious experience. As a matter of fact, I remember one time when he was thrashed down on the fact that the money keepers and things of that sort were not living well. But he was not a trained Jewish a rabbi, but he had a philosophy of life that is what people believed in.
The thing that's disturbing me is the disturbances between religious groups. They're so intent on their rights and their religion, and yet we're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to live a good life that's helpful and good to other people, and yet they get so upset at times if something isn't followed by the rules of their particular church.
You know, we think of Adam marrying a Catholic girl, and the fact that I have talked with his mother, and his mother says he is not a Catholic. But the interesting thing is that he goes to Catholic church with his wife, and he went through that baptism ceremony where there's a little baby 6 months old, doesn't know anything about anything. All these people gathered together. We went into church, and that priest absolutely baptized that child to bring him into the church. But they live so differently in a lot of ways than we live.
Well, I think so many, now in our church, we didn't baptize that child, but it was a service for the parents mostly. And it actually was the same ceremony, but we didn't use the water to baptize because we believed in immersion. I don't think of God as a person like you and me. I don't feel that I'm going to go on and see my mother as I knew her as a mother. I feel it more her feeling as a spirit, as I feel she's with me now. I feel I talk to her sometimes, and the others in my family that I love so much. So, I don't know. I can't explain it all. I can't explain it all. I feel it's a spirit.
You wouldn't believe it,
feeling.
but there are thousands of people who feel that when they die, they'll go up and be near their fathers and their mothers again.
Well, in the Bible it says He's going to prepare a place for us. Well, what does that mean?
Yes, what does it mean? We're just struggling to stay alive here, and
We know our bodies don't go. I feel it's a spiritual feeling and something in me that means a lot. So it's hard to explain. I'm not worried about dying. I've had a wonderful life, and when I'm gone, I hope it'll just be a memory of my life that I've had that'll live on, and I think it will. But
you know,
when my time comes, I don't want to linger. I don't like to be like my mother was for 2 years in a nursing home where she couldn't get up and couldn't do anything. One of the last things she says, I can't see, I can't hear, I can't help anyone anymore. I don't want to be that way. So I want to keep as active as I can right now and do as much when my time comes. I hope it comes quickly, and I'm not worried about it.
we've really had a nice mature life, and we're both surprised that we're very much above 90 degrees, 90 years old, and going just fine because we never expected it. We don't even know why we're 90 years old and going nicely. So to look toward the future like that, you have to look at our past and our relationship. And so, as far as I'm concerned, your relationship with your family, particularly with your wife, are the things that give you a uniformity of life that is definitely passed on. You notice you thought of your parents and what they've done, and you think of the thing that's a lot of fun about it. So we we acquire knowledge from our own past experiences, and they are passed on. So we're pretty well.
Yeah, with us, I think, too, is that we always enjoyed being together and doing things together. With the children and just the two of us, too, just making things, building things, building a cabin.
You've noticed in your own life. I just started thinking, which of the two of you was willing to stand the idea of 4 children? All of a sudden from 1 to 4. And the fact that you faced that together and enjoyed it together is very meaningful in your relationship. Pretty nice.
I'm most proud of the family that we've raised and the success we've had together in being a family, and then going on to seeing our children with their families and how they're raising them, and now you and your families. And I'm proud of that, I really am, because you all enjoy each other so much and do things together and are happy to be together. And I see that in your children, you know, they're this way too. I think that's the most thing I'm proud of in my lifetime.
You look at the simple facts of life in this age. The number of people that are dying in families, a lot of poverty, a lot of people without jobs. We never went through this. Grace was never went out and looked for a job in their life. They came to her because they knew her. Apparently, they were short of dietitians. People knew where dietitians were, and they're on lists of people. So it's the sort of thing that has been easy. We have no people that have passed away, no people with severe injuries or illnesses that lasted so long. I started thinking of your father and the fact that he told me that he had a camera down his stomach. Well, that's enough worry to me, because I never dreamed that something like that still could happen. But on the other hand, he's done very well. His letter said that yesterday that he felt that he had really had an enjoyable life with a variety of things that he had done as a mechanical engineer.
Who said that?
Bob.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he said he listed all the things that he had accomplished in many different areas, you know, from being a ship's engineering officer to a teacher in 3 institutions. And so essentially, and then this energy information has made a very interesting life.
I'm so thankful that I had the family I had when I grew up, their parents, their encouragement, for opportunities, for the expectations of our efforts in education and helping us as much as they could through. And then I am thankful for the education I did have that helped me to provide for myself. And then for meeting Bob and the family we've had, and the many years we've had a good time together and enjoyed being together. And now I'm so happy to see all of you developing as you have, and your children too. You're doing well. Things are they're harder now. They're so different. And when you do have to be out as a mother working and then caring for them at home, and I was fortunate that I could be home until Susie was 10 years old. By then they had grown up enough they could do things for themselves, and they did. They were very responsible, and that meant a lot to me. So it's been a wonderful life for me.